Welcome back to the Sully Scoop, where three lifelong Husker bros dive in depth on all surrounding the new era of Husker football, where our cups never run dry of the Roulade under head coach Matt Rule, made by fans for fans with J-Saul, B-Saul, and T-Saul. The Sully Scoop is the official Nebraska Cornhusker football podcast brought to you by Big Banter. Welcome into the Grandstand gossip on the Sully Scoop, presented by Big Banter.
Yeah, you're here with J-Saul, B-Saul, and T-Saul. And this week we're doing a special Grandstand gossip episode. And the Grandstand gossip this week is about the Big Banter Big Ten Power Rankings and just how out of sorts they are based on how all the different podcasts are ranking teams. And I'll give a quick rundown and then we'll jump it over to B-Saul. But the quick rundown is Michigan's first and second's Penn State, third is Ohio State, fourth is Iowa, fifth Maryland, sixth Wisconsin, seven Rutgers, eight Minnesota, nine Illinois, tied for 10th is Michigan State, Purdue, 12th is Nebraska, that's crazy, 13 Indiana, and 14 Northwestern. B-Saul, what are your thoughts?
I'd love to know how people are ranking these teams. I mean, when you look back at it, I know the Purdue guys at Boilermaker Express have been given the Turtle Talk a hard time here, as they don't think very highly of Maryland, and I think that weights down the Maryland ranking here. But the Turtles don't think very high of Purdue, and I don't know that anybody should at this point. But a 1-2 Purdue team being ranked ahead of Nebraska at this point, when Nebraska is the number 2 overall defense, is kind of a joke.
Well, B-Saul, it's more than just Purdue in my rankings. I look at this, Nebraska should at least be 9, and really I'd put them at 8 because, I mean, we're talking Rutgers, But what I'm getting at is Michigan State just got embarrassed on the national stage, and I wonder what Bacon Wire has to say about that. But I wonder if they even still got a football team out there in Lansing, or East Lansing, as he corrected the Turtleheads a couple weeks back. Because Washington ran them off the field, but then again, Washington would probably run most teams off the field in the Big Ten this season. And, Illinois, we had a lot of back and forth with the Illini guys at Illini Cast, and they seem to think that Nebraska would lose to Toledo and Kansas, which is just mind-boggling, if you ask me.
Yeah, I think that's kind of outrageous that they think that Kansas, Toledo would both beat the Huskers. I think Michigan State getting embarrassed this week shows a lot of where they should have been, and that should have been below Nebraska. Nebraska, don't get me wrong, they do have 2 losses. However, both were Power 5 teams against 2 Power 5 teams that they played on the road to open the season with the new head coach. No other team in the Big Ten has done that. And I mean, Michigan is the number 1 team, I guess, but in Victor's Nation, obviously, could be very, very happy about that. The podcast here with Big Banter. However, who have they played? Who have they beaten? Nobody. But I think the What's Choppin' podcast for the Rutgers Scarlet Knights should just be happy that anyone even knows their name. However, I don't think they should be ranked 7. I think the Huskers realistically should be at the 8 or 9. Illinois almost lost to Toledo, and that's their only win. I do not know how the Illini cast thinks that Illinois is truly better than the Huskers.
Yeah, and I mean, Northwestern, I think to begin the season, have just been dead last, and they haven't moved. And I wonder what the Wild Chats have to say about that. But for me, I think Northwestern is a better team than a couple of teams in the Big Ten. And that, to some people, might sound like a hot take, but I don't think that Indiana is better than Northwestern. And ultimately, I think Michigan State is going to end up being the worst team in the Big Ten. After they're showing with Washington, I think the walls are falling down. I think their carpet's turning into mud. Ultimately, I think Michigan State is done this season.
I would agree with you. I think the Mel Tucker distraction is going to be harder for the Michigan State football team than the Pat Fitzgerald one. The Fitzgerald issues happened before the season, granted right before the season, but Northwestern had a chance to rally around it. This Michigan State controversy came in the middle of the season, and it's really going to hinder the continuity on that team there. You now have to listen to a new coach. You now have to get, the team believing in his message, saying it's us against the world. And I just don't know that they'll be able to do that. Another thing that I noticed that I disagree with here is how can you rank Penn State above Ohio State? At a certain point here, you still have to go with the guys who have been there before, who have done it. Penn State, all of a sudden, it's, Jonathan Franklin, everybody's like, oh yeah, you're James Franklin. Everybody's like, yeah, you're a great head coach. You've only been here for 7 years and never had us in a Big Ten championship game. So why does everybody think all of a sudden he's going to be able to do it this year when Michigan returns pretty much the same team? Ohio State is probably not as strong as they've been in years past, but the team still has a ton of talent on the offense and defensive side of the ball.
Yeah,
Well,
I'm not buying into that either. And ultimately you'd have to ask the Booze, Bets, and Ball podcast, which is the Penn State boys, about how they think they're better than Ohio State. And then you could ask the Ohio podcast, and I think you'd get a more true answer that Ohio State has beaten them, like I believe it's 5 or 6 years in a row. And you expect that to continue. And they're going to be fully tested after playing Notre Dame this week.
Well, I do believe that they are going to pad those stats, and I don't think Inside the Nest is going to like this prediction, but I do have Penn State beating Iowa this week. And I mean, Iowa, who have they beaten? Nobody. There is no reason that they should be ranked number 4. However, I think that's going to boost Penn State, and I could honestly see some of these podcasts in Big Banter flipping Penn State to number 1 if they are to knock off Iowa.
Yeah, I could see them flipping them to JSUL. However, let's face it, Penn State beating Iowa should happen 9 out of 10 times there. It's not like we're talking Iowa is a powerhouse.
Well, they are a ranked team, and Michigan hasn't taken on a ranked team. I mean, they're going to be taking on their first Power 5 team this week against Rutgers.
An undefeated Rutgers, I will have you know as well, JSUL.
And an overrated Rutgers in the Big Banter Power Rankings.
Yeah, what's chopping won't let us forget that. But, we could just go and ask the Badger Wire how they, have they been paying people to put them at 6? That's kind of what I'm wondering, because after losing to Washington State, nothing points and says Wisconsin should be number 6, other than the fact that maybe people are thinking of, Wisconsin back in the days when they were the team with Brett Bielema and they were winning the Big Ten, because Washington State is terrible. And ultimately, a lot of teams below them would probably beat Washington State, like Nebraska.
Now, I think there's a couple big games this week here, especially that should help iron out some of this Big Ten power rankings. To start it out, I mean, Purdue tied for 10, Wisconsin 6. It's a Friday night game. Do you guys really think Purdue's got a shot here? I know it's not the same Wisconsin team, but I think Wisconsin's just going to overpower Purdue.
I'm not so sold there, B-So.
I am not sold. I think it's going to be a close game. This one is at Purdue.
Now, I think here's something for you guys. Do you think that Purdue beats Wisconsin and puts Wisconsin at 0-1 in the Big Ten with a 2-2 record?
That's a tough
sell. I'm not willing to bet on either side. I mean, I think it's a coin flip of a game.
Because if that were to happen and Nebraska beats Louisiana Tech, technically we're tied with Wisconsin, who everybody had picked to win the Big Ten West.
And B-So, I think that's just how the Big Ten West is going to play out. And I do want to give a shout out to the Leo podcast, just because they're the only ones we didn't mention earlier on this talk. And ultimately, most people would wonder why you'd even mention them, because Indiana's probably going to be dead last at the end of the season with Michigan State.
It's also another big week here because I'd like to bring up one of T-Cell's hot takes that we did share with Ski U, but want everybody to know here. Northwestern takes on Minnesota this week, and this is a game T-Sol's had circled on the calendar for PJ Fleck. He believes this is his going away party. T-Sol thinks Northwestern will upset Minnesota and cause PJ Fleck to lose his job. And I got to ask you, T-Sol, are you still confident in that and locking that in this week?
B-Sol, you better believe I'm locking it in because Northwestern is exactly where I expected them to be and exactly where I wanted them to be for this hot take. Now, remember, the PJ Fleck going away party, that just has to happen by the end of the season. But Northwestern, they're sitting with one win, UTEP, if you even count that as a win, and Minnesota thinks that they're better than they are, but guess what? They just got beat down by North Carolina. This is a trap game by definition for Minnesota. And all the fans of Minnesota have high expectations for the team. At this point in time, they're kind of like Nebraska was with Bo Pelini. They expect 9 wins. And you know what? They want more. And if he comes out here and blows a game to Northwestern, when they know they have one of the toughest schedules in the Big Ten, that's going to spell problems for Minnesota this season.
Well, thanks for joining us for another week of the Grandstand Gossip here with the Sully Scoop. You're here with J-Sol.
B-Sol.
And T-Sol.
And don't forget to write in at Sully_Scoop on Twitter if you want to be featured on the next Grandstand Gossip.
Go Big Red.